Step into your adventures in dreamland. Soft, surreal, and slightly cheeky sleep stories with awe and wonder. I'm Serene, your guide tonight. I'm so glad you're here. However your day unfolded, I'm grateful to be a part of how it ends. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is. I read every comment. Every tap helps pay the cloud mortgage here in Dreamland. And if your finger ever drifts towards the subscribe button, rumor has it your sleep deepens by 11%. Not proven, just whispered. I say the science is still out. Now we return to what we are. It's strange. People have no idea. There are only 3 states of being, and you move through all of them every night. Right now, we're in our most superficial state, awake, bound by the senses and ego, influenced by the outward stimuli of the physical world. And while dreaming, the subconscious is in control, projecting stored impressions, thoughts, desires, no longer governed by the physical rules. And in deep sleep, there are no dreams, no mental activity, no ego, just a temporary return to the pure awareness of the soul, united with the divine, though you won't remember it. Bliss without awareness, tasting divine peace, what yogis pursue in stillness and saints devote lifetimes to finding. So relax. Let go. You are returning back to your inherent state. Freedom. Your story begins. Pirate Havens and Hidden Economies is episode 34 and part 2 of 4 in our Real Life Pirates mini-series. Located inside our Dream Wonders playlist, where we marvel at life's fascinating facts. It's me, Captain Marlowe, back at your side, and tonight I'm steering you off the waves and straight into the crooked streets of the pirate havens. So, you've survived the seas with me, the storms, the biscuits hard as cannon shot, and the stink of hammocks in close quarters. Well done. But a pirate's life wasn't all salt spray and black flags. Sometimes we needed to set foot on land, to drink, to mend, to spend, and, let's be honest, to stir up as much trouble ashore as we did in afloat. The air here is warmer than the sea breeze we left behind, thick with smoke, spice, and sweat. Can you smell it drifting in? Stay close to me now, dreamer, as we step onto the dock together. Picture me stepping off the gangplank, boots thudding onto sun-baked docks. The smell hits first. Fish guts, tar, smoke, and rum leaking from every tavern door. Shouts ring in a dozen languages. English, French, Spanish, Dutch, African tongues, Creole. Sailors haggle, merchants mutter, drunks sing half-forgotten ballads. It's chaos, but it's our kind of chaos. Okay, either I've had one too many rum cakes at dinner, or I've just stepped off a ship with a bunch of pirates who smell like they haven't bathed since Columbus. The planks creak underfoot, rocking almost like the ship's hammock you just rose from. Pirate havens were more than watering holes. They were beating hearts of lawlessness, safe ports to sell stolen sugar, bribe a governor, or find a fresh crew. And unlike the tidy cities of Europe, these places had no polished cobblestones or prim guards. Streets were muddy. Wooden buildings leaned like drunks at midnight, and the only law was the one you could enforce with your cutlass. These ports are where the sea's stories took root. By night, taverns roared with lies, boasts, and laughter. By morning, those same stories spread from island to island until they grew into the legends you still hear today. But don't be fooled. Beneath the rum and song was grit, hunger, and danger lurking in every shadow. So, traveler, keep close. I'll take you through the crooked streets and smoky taverns. You'll see the pirate world, not from a book, but from the mud, sweat, and blood of its havens. 2. Nassau, Bahamas, the Pirate Republic. Now, let's begin with Nassau, perched on New Providence Island in the Bahamas. To kings and merchants, it was a pestilence. To us, it was paradise. If paradise can smell like gunpowder and spilled ale. By the early 1700s, Nassau had become a pirate stronghold, the so-called Pirate Republic. The sun spills hot across Nassau's harbor, painting the water in gold, while gulls scream overhead. The harbor was shallow enough to protect nimble sloops, but treacherous for heavy Navy ships. That made it perfect for us. Over 2,000 pirates swarmed the place at its peak, from Blackbeard to Calico Jack, all calling Nassau home. Yet even in this rough democracy, certain names loomed large. Benjamin Hornigold, once a mentor to Blackbeard, helped set Nassau's early tone before switching sides and becoming a pirate hunter himself. Charles Vane, on the other hand, fought bitterly against royal pardons, leading raids that made him infamous even among his peers, and looming over them all was Governor Woodes Rogers, the man sent to break the Republic. With pardons in one hand and gallows in the other, Rogers eventually ended Nassau's brief dream of independence. For a few wild years, though, the harbor was a stage where outlaws ruled, and the world watched in both horror and fascination. What made it special wasn't just the rumor, the loot, it was the democracy. On land, as at sea, pirates voted. They elected leaders, made decisions by council, and shared spoils more equally than any kingdom on the map. Merchants might sneer at rabble, but for sailors sick of flogging captains and starving wages, Nassau was freedom itself. Of course, It wasn't all noble experiment. Nassau reeked of taverns, where fights broke out nightly. Can you hear the tavern songs tumbling out into the streets? Half-drunken choirs of rebellion, gambling tables rattled with dice, and cards slapped against sticky wood. Prostitutes, smugglers, and fortune seekers crowded every corner. Gold and rum flowed fast, sometimes faster than a man's life. The salt air mixes with the sweet burn of rum. It clings to your skin, a perfume of freedom and decay. The stories born here, of free men living beyond kings, of taverns echoing with laughter and rebellion, later inspired writers to dream up pirate utopias. But the reality was harsher. Wooden shacks, ready to burn, disease in the alleys, and betrayal behind every smile. Nassau was no Eden. It was a powder keg with a black flag nailed to the mast. And still, when I think of freedom, I smell that Bahamian air, hot, salty, alive with voices of rogues who dared to live outside the law. 3. Port Royal, Jamaica. Wealthy, dangerous, destroyed by earthquake. If Nassau was the rowdy tavern of piracy, Port Royal was the gilded stage. By the late 1600s, this Jamaican port was called the wickedest city on earth. And for once, the nickname wasn't exaggeration. Long before its earthquake downfall, Port Royal had already earned its dark fame through men like Henry Morgan. As a privateer, Morgan led brutal raids across the Spanish Main, filling the port with stolen silver and blood-soaked treasure. The irony is sharp. Morgan later became Lieutenant Governor of Jamaica, tasked with enforcing the very laws he once mocked. His legacy shaped Port Royal's character, half respectable colony, half den of thieves. By the time pirates thronged its taverns, the city was already living in Morgan's shadow, a place where law and outlaw blurred until the earth itself seemed to give way. You can almost feel the heat rising from the cobblestones here, as if the whole city itself is sweating under the weight of its sins. Port Royal sat at the mouth of Kingston Harbor, perfectly placed for trade routes. Spanish, English, Dutch, everyone passed by, their holds heavy with silver, sugar, and spices. The wealth pouring through the port made it rich, but also rotten. Taverns lined the streets like teeth in a shark's grin. Over 100 of them in a town barely a mile wide. Brothels, gambling dens, markets hawking stolen goods. If Nassau was gritty freedom, Port Royal was decadent sin. Merchants and pirates rubbed elbows here. A governor might look the other way, pocketing bribes, while a privateer swaggered in with pockets full of loot. For sailors, it was paradise. Drink, dice, and the promise of coin, spent as fast as it was stolen. For the churches, back in Europe, it was Sodom with sails. And then, the end came swift. In 1692, a massive earthquake struck. Buildings collapsed, the ground split open, and much of Port Royal slid into the sea. Hundreds drowned as waves swallowed the taverns and brothels whole. Survivors claimed it was God's judgment, a holy punishment for the city's wickedness. The truth? Jamaica sat on a fault line, and greed had piled buildings too close to shifting earth. Yet the legend of Port Royal lived on. Writers and preachers spoke of it as a pirate Babylon, destroyed in a single breath, like something out of scripture. Later books and films painted it as the ultimate pirate playground, a glittering den of rogues swallowed by fate. In reality, it was muddy, violent, and built on shaky ground from the start. 4. Madagascar and Indian Ocean havens, safe anchorages, global crossroads. Not all pirate havens sat in the Caribbean. Some of the most important lay far east, across half the world, in the Indian Ocean. And at the heart of it all was Madagascar, a vast island where jungle green met endless blue, the air heavy with salt and jasmine. Madagascar offered what every pirate craved: hiding places. Its coves and inlets shielded ships from naval patrols, and its sheer size made it nearly impossible to police. More than safety, it offered opportunity. This was the crossroads of global trade. Ships from Arabia, India, Africa, and Europe passed through, holds packed with silks, spices, and jewels. If the Caribbean was rum and sugar, this was cinnamon and gold. Legends of the region spread back to Europe, thanks to figures like Thomas Tew and Captain William Kidd. Tew, the Rhode Island pirate, made a fortune in the Red Sea, inspiring dozens of others to sail east. Kidd's tale ended on a London gallows, but rumors of his buried treasure gave Madagascar a mythic glow. For sailors who heard whispers in taverns, from Boston to Bristol, the Indian Ocean wasn't just a place on a map. It was a promise, a world where the rules of empire could be left behind, and fortune might be waiting beyond the horizon. The little port of Ile Sainte-Marie became infamous as a pirate stronghold. Ships dropped anchor in its turquoise shallows, while crews patched sails, traded with local rulers, and lived in ramshackle settlements that smelled of wood smoke and salt. Some pirates stayed for weeks, others forever, marrying Malagasy women and raising families in strange little half-European, half-island communities on the edges of empire. Of course, it wasn't paradise. Malaria stalked the swamps, supplies ran short, and rival crews sometimes slit each other's throats over barrels of rice. But for a fleeting moment, the Indian Ocean gave pirates something rare, a foothold outside Europe's grasp, a taste of freedom at the edge of the world. Imagine lying on deck beneath stars invisible from the Caribbean, hearing waves that crashed with a different rhythm. To those dreamers of the sea, Madagascar was more than an island. It
was a doorway to a life unclaimed by any crown. A dreamland carved out of jungle, salt, and secrecy.
5. Economy of piracy and the black markets. Beyond the islands, pirate plunder seeped directly into the colonial economy. Merchants in New England ports, like Boston and Newport, quietly bought sugar, molasses, and cloth from pirate crews. No questions asked. These goods fed into the booming rum trade, linking taverns in the Americas to raids half a world away. Even governors who publicly condemned piracy often drank the profits in their own glasses of rum. The black market wasn't just shadow commerce. It was the hidden fuel of an empire that pretended not to see where its riches came from. Freedom on the seas didn't mean much if you couldn't turn stolen barrels into coin. That's where the pirate economy came in, slippery, shadowy, and always humming. Pirates weren't fools. They knew nobody wanted a shipload of rum marked with another man's stamp. So they relied on fences, shady merchants who bought plunder at a discount and sold it on as if it were clean. Sugar, tobacco, cloth, weapons. Once they passed through these middlemen, no king's inspector could tell they'd come from under a black flag. And the merchants, they grumbled in public, but in truth, they made tidy profits. A pirate's stolen cargo, sold cheap, was still worth a fortune once it hit Europe's markets. Entire colonies quietly depended on this shadow trade. The air in these markets carried the sweet burn of molasses and the sharp bite of brine, as if every coin exchanged still smelled faintly of the sea it came from. Then came the bribes. Governors, customs officials, even naval officers found their pockets lined with pirate silver. A wink, a handshake, and a chest slid across a desk could make a legal problem disappear. For every pirate hanging on a gallows, another slipped by thanks to a greased palm. But it wasn't just corruption, it was survival. Ports like Nassau or Port Royal couldn't have thrived without the goods pirates dragged in. The pirate economy bled into the legitimate one, blurring the line between lawless and lawful. And this shadow world wasn't just whispers in a governor's office. It came alive in the black markets. Picture a warehouse by the docks at midnight, lanterns flickering against damp stone, barrels of sugar rolled in under tarpaulins, crates of tobacco stacked high, bolts of cloth hidden beneath sacks of grain, weapons too, muskets traded like apples, powder kegs tucked behind barrels of salt pork. Merchants swore their goods were honest, but you could smell the sea on them, taste the theft in the rum. Buyers didn't care. Cheap was cheap. A pirate's loot, once slipped into these back doors, became indistinguishable from the cargo of respectable ships. For pirates, these markets were lifelines,
Without them, loot was just dead weight in the hold. With them, a shipload of stolen sugar could be turned into coin, and coin into the next round of rum, repairs, and bribes. For the listener, imagine walking through those alleys, the night air sticky with molasses and smoke, your boots crunching on spilled grain. You'd hear the soft clink of coins changing hands, the hushed laughter of deals struck in shadows. It wasn't just trade, it was transformation. The moment piracy slipped off its mask and walked, bold as brass, into everyday life. 6. Recruitment on shore. Sailors, deserters, and locals joining pirate crews. Every raid, every storm, every sickness thinned pirate crews. That meant havens weren't just for rest, they were for recruitment. Taverns doubled as hiring halls. A sailor staggering in from a merchant voyage might be nursing bruises from a captain's lash. Wages withheld yet again. The pirates at the next table would grin, buy him a drink, and whisper promises equal shares. No flogging, a vote in ship matters. By the time the glass was empty, he was halfway to swearing the black flag. If you pause here in the tavern doorway, you can almost hear the promises mixing with the clink of glasses, 1,000 lives ready to turn on the flip of a coin. There were deserters too, soldiers stationed in hot, miserable colonies found life under a governor's boot, worse than piracy. Some slipped away at night, trading a uniform for a cutlass. Locals sometimes joined as well. Islanders, freedmen, runaway slaves, and adventurers seeking more than grinding poverty ashore. Pirate ships, for all their violence, offered something rare, a place where a man's worth was judged by skill, not birth. It wasn't equality in the modern sense, but it was a crack in the iron wall of empire. Recruitment wasn't always gentle. Captured merchant crews often heard the ultimatum: join us, or be set loose without food or ship. Some refused. Others, with little to lose, stepped over the line into piracy. And so, havens buzzed with new faces. By the time a ship refitted and resupplied, its crew might be half strangers, bound not by loyalty, but by desperation and hope. 7. Taverns and social life. Drinking, gambling, planning raids, stories spreading. Step into a pirate tavern, dreamer, though you might regret breathing too deeply. The air is thick with smoke, sweat, and the sour tang of spilled rum. Tables creak under the weight of dice games, mugs, and elbows. Every corner hums with noise. Sailors bellowing sea shanties, coins clattering, knives thudding into wood as drunken bets turn dangerous. These taverns were more than watering holes. They were the true parliaments of piracy. Here, raids were planned on the backs of ale-stained maps, alliances forged over sloshing tankards, and grudges settled with fists or pistols. No marble halls, no velvet robes, just rough men, and sometimes women, crowded around splintered tables, deciding the fate of ships and fortunes with a shout and a nod. And oh, the stories. A single raid could grow into legend by nightfall. We fought 100 Spaniards with only 12 men. The governor begged for mercy on his knees. Lies and truths tangled together, retold until nobody cared which was which. That's how myths spread faster than ships could sail, carried by drunken tongues in smoky rooms. Of course, taverns weren't safe. Brawls erupted as quick as laughter. A spilled drink could end with a knife between ribs. But for many pirates, this was the pulse of their world. No lonely cabins, quiet parlors. Their social life was loud, rough, and soaked in liquor. And still, there's something almost whimsical about it. Imagine a dream where the world's fiercest rogues are reduced to a squabble over cards, or where the planning of a grand raid pauses because someone's parrot stole the dice. In these crooked rooms, empires were defied, legends were born, and half the time, nobody even remembered the details come morning. 8. Alliances and politics, pirates, bribing governors, sometimes offered pardons. For all their swagger, pirates weren't lone wolves. They thrived in the shadows of politics, striking crooked alliances that let them keep sailing when the gallows loomed. Some governors, far from the watchful eye of London or Madrid, learned quickly that a pirate's gold was worth more than loyalty to a distant king. Chests of silver slid quietly across tables, rum casks delivered as gifts, promises whispered in smoke-filled chambers. A governor might thunder about justice by day, then drink to a pirate's health by night. It went deeper. Sometimes the very men charged with hunting pirates became their best customers. Naval officers pocketed bribes. Merchants bought stolen goods. Even clergymen were rumored to enjoy coin that jingled too brightly. The line between pirate and politician blurred until nobody could tell who wore the crown and who wore the cutlass. And then there were the pardons. Time and again, monarchs offered amnesty to pirates willing to give up the game. Some accepted, weary of storms, wounds, or the hangman's noose. Others signed the papers only to return to see the moment temptation whispered. Forgiven on parchment, damned in practice. It was a dangerous dance, power wrapped in corruption, survival stitched to betrayal. But for the pirates, it kept the hangman waiting a little longer. And for us, dear dreamer, it shows that piracy wasn't just born of chaos. It was fed quietly by the very rulers who condemned it. 9. Shipyards and repairs, refitting vessels, hiding spoils, crafting false identities. Every ship was a living creature, and like any beast, it needed tending. Pirate havens thrummed with the noise of shipyards, hammers ringing, saws biting through wood, the scent of pitch boiling in great black pots. Here, battered sloops limped in with torn sails and splintered hulls, only to emerge sharp and hungry again. Carpenters caulked seams, sailmakers stitched canvas, and blacksmiths reshaped stolen cannon to fit new decks. Even in lawless ports, there was an art to keeping a ship alive, and every plank mattered, for a leaky hull could kill as swiftly as a Spanish broadside. But the work wasn't just repairs, it was disguise. Pirates often repainted hulls, altered figureheads, or flew false flags to fool their prey. A ship that was the Revenge one week might appear as the Hope the next, slipping past patrols with a new name and fresh colors. And what of the spoils? Gold and goods were hidden beneath false bulkheads, rum stashed in barrels labeled as fish, weapons packed away under sacks of flour. Havens became workshops, not only of wood and iron, but of deception. Picture it now, the echo of hammer strikes mixing with gull cries, the smell of tar clinging to your skin, the restless murmur of men eager to sail again. In these crooked shipyards, piracy reinvented itself with every tide, preparing once more to slip into the wide blue dream of the sea. 10. Women in havens, merchants, tavern keepers, and sometimes pirates themselves. Though the tales often picture piracy as a boys-only club of dirty beards and louder egos, the havens told a fuller story. Women walked these crooked streets too, and they weren't just waiting in the wings. Many ran taverns, their ledgers sharper than any cutlass. Picture them balancing mugs, debts, and a room full of sailors drunk on rum and rebellion. These women were merchants, keepers of the hearth fires where crews gathered, and the quiet bankers of stolen fortunes. Without them, pirate towns would have starved faster than ships in a dead calm. And yes, some women went further. Anne Bonny and Mary Read proved a woman could swing a blade and curse as well as any man. They slipped into crews disguised in rough clothes, earning respect through courage, not gender. Their names became whispers of legend, proof that the black flag made room for those bold enough to claim it. For most, the havens offered no romance, only hard work and harder bargains. But if you listen closely, dreamer, you might hear the laughter of a tavern mistress outlasting the thunder of cannons, her voice woven into the fabric of pirate lore, every bit as tightly as the men who carried pistols on deck. But for many women, Port Royal or Nassau wasn't a place of free choice. Debt, poverty, or coercion forced them into taverns and brothels, where survival meant serving the very men who raided the seas. Their labor kept the havens alive as much as rum or stolen sugar, yet it rarely made the legends. In a sense, their lives mirrored piracy itself, dangerous, desperate, and lived in defiance of a world stacked against them. 11. Danger and risk in havens, betrayals, naval crackdowns, spies. Of course, pirate havens were no utopias. They pulsed with danger, as if every cup of rum came mixed with the risk of betrayal. Naval crackdowns came sudden and merciless. One week the streets brimmed with swaggering freebooters. The next they ran with soldiers and blood. Gallows were raised in the squares, ropes swinging in the hot wind, while ships burned in the harbor as warnings. The message was clear. Empires might tolerate piracy for a while, but they never forgot vengeance. And then there were the spies. Every crowded tavern carried the chance of a stranger listening too closely, a friendly gambler with questions just a little too sharp. One careless boast could see an entire crew hunted down by morning. Even friends turned dangerous. A drunken shipmate might sell out his fellows for a pouch of silver and the hope of amnesty. In havens built on loyalty and lies, trust was the rarest currency of all. Still, the dream pulled them back. Pirates risked it all for a night of freedom on land, even if the very ground beneath their boots might betray them. For you, dreamer, imagine it. Every smile a mask, every toast a gamble, every shadow a secret that could end your voyage before dawn. 12. Havens as myth makers. How ports became breeding grounds for pirate legends. If the sea made pirates feared, the havens made them famous. These crooked ports were rumor factories, churning out legends faster than ships could sail. Every drunken tale in a Nassau tavern or whispered boast in Port Royal became the seed of myth. A simple raid grew into an epic. A dozen enemies slain with one hand, treasure buried beneath palm trees, a governor humbled on his knees. Storytellers never worried about the truth. They wanted awe, laughter, or fear. Travelers carried these tales home, feeding ballads, pamphlets, and eventually novels. The pirate who swaggered through a smoky tavern at midnight might wake to find himself already a legend by morning, his name sung in ports he'd never seen. Havens turned real men into larger-than-life characters, half fact, half fantasy. And here's the twist. The pirates leaned into it. They knew a fearsome reputation could win a fight before a blade was drawn. Better to be imagined as monsters than to be mistaken for desperate sailors. The havens gave them that mask, a stage where myth was hammered together with rum, dice, and smoke. Dreamer, Imagine sitting in one of those taverns, your ears filled with wild tales, your mind blurring the line between fact and fiction. By the time dawn came, you wouldn't know what was true, and maybe you wouldn't care. And so, we leave the havens behind. The markets have quieted, the tavern candles gutter low, and the crooked streets fade back into the mist. It's strange, isn't it? These rough ports were both haven and hazard, places where pirates found freedom, family and betrayal all tangled together. Places that built their legends and sometimes destroyed them. But don't drift off just yet. Out on the open sea waits something even stranger. The rules pirates lived by. A kind of democracy written not in marble halls, but on salt-stained scraps of paper. Next time, we'll uncover the codes that govern life under the black flag. Rules about loot, justice, even punishment. A world where equality and cruelty coexisted on the same deck. For now, you're safe, dreamer. The noise of the havens fades. Your bed creaks like a ship at anchor. Your blanket folds soft as sails. Close your eyes. The sea will wait, and the stories will return when the stars rise again